If anyone finds the paper, by the way, going back to before, I don't recall the actual paper itself sort of going off piece a little bit. I don't recall the paper. I've got it somewhere, but certainly, going off piece, there is a big correlation with the heart rate at 3 years of age. Lower heart rate, higher aggression at 11 years of age. It's a strong indicator. I'll find it for you, send it across to you. You can read for yourself, and it's quite fascinating. That's obviously not to say that everyone's got a lower heart rate going to be aggressive, but there is a correlation there going forward. But equally, later on in life, there's a correlation between low heart rate aggression and high heart rate and anxiety. So people who've got higher heart rate tend to be more anxious in one sense, but that's another story for another day. So language, getting back to the drawing board and what we've been covering, we transmit really complicated thoughts to one another. Human beings. I'm a human being too, by the way. I'm in that sort of club. We're all human beings in here. So we transmit really complicated thoughts to each other through language. Okay? Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and we're sort of reflecting back to what we covered earlier this morning. So think of a problem that you might have, not a major problem, something sort of pressing, whatever that might be. And perhaps as you sort of think about that, has everyone got something that's sort of playing on their mind a little bit? Nothing major, nothing sort of, And as you think about that, I want you to think about, and perhaps you'd like to close your eyes if you're comfortable closing your eyes. You don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to. It's entirely up to you. And as you close your eyes and you breathe naturally and normally, and you notice your feet on the floor and your back on the chair, and as you make yourself comfortable, and one hand might feel warm than the other, and you take yourself back to a time when you felt peaceful, calm, and what you see, what you heard, what you felt, any smells. And as you sort of go back to that state of peacefulness, and I know you've been thinking about this problem, this minor problem, whatever the problem might be, for a while now, and as you sort of reflect on it, take a time out and take a step back. And as you take a step back, just see it like you see a film on a TV screen. And if you could be any way you wanted to be different, how you've been, how do you want it to be different? And just reflecting on the screen. And if you could be any way you wanted to be, if you could be any way you want to be different from how you've been, how do you want it to be different? And you might figure it out in 5 minutes, you might figure it out now, or you might work it out when you're reading a paper tomorrow or going for a walk on the weekend. Or perhaps there's nothing to figure out. Just let things take their course. And as you let things take their course, gradually in your own time, in your own pace, just come back to the here and now. Okay? And as you come back to the here and now, if all your thoughts emptied into a bag, and you can place them to one side for now, you can pick them up later if you wish. For now, we can sort of move forward and think primal times. Now, if we go back to these primal times, back in the day before my time, as you do, how would we communicate different to how we communicate now? What would the communication method be? Let's say, for example, lunchtime, let's say we have a coffee break, and I decide in my infinite wisdom that I'm going to sort of carry on doing a few bits and pieces on the computer, and I decide, actually, you know what, I don't have the capacity to speak. I don't communicate in that way. I communicate primarily. And I want a coffee. And Karen gives me eye contact, and I think, okay, I'm going to... how would I express myself? How would I communicate to anyone in the room to get me that coffee? What would I do? Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I would grunt. I would point. Does that sound like your household now? Yeah. Is that Andy on a long day? Yeah.
Before me
Yeah,
coffee.
yeah, where Everton gets beat. Yeah. No, we never get. You don't want a coffee then. Yeah, definitely. But the point being is that, can you see, primarily we didn't have language. So think about babies and the way they sort of express themselves. What do babies do when the baby wants affection?
Right.
Yeah, when the baby wants watering, when it wants feeding, and so on and so forth. It's got a way of expressing oneself. Now, animals, how do they communicate? Sign language, sound. Yeah. So, yeah, they've got their own way. So they've got expression, sound, signs, so all these sort of things. Animals communicate in their own way. So what we have as human beings is quite unique in one sense, in the way we communicate. Okay? And it's pretty fascinating, really, when you think about it, because we are, am I correct in saying, after literature, we are 98% same DNA as a chimpanzee, I believe, in and around that. Some more than others. Okay, and me closer to the chimpanzee, the way I behave sometimes. But the point being is that I find it really fascinating. I know that I'm going to get other neuroscientists debating and say sequential is different, but it is certainly, of course, obviously it is. But the point being is that sort of putting it out there. But more to the point, what I'm sort of implying is that we're 2% different. How many words can a chimpanzee say? Probably a handful, maybe 20, 30. How many can we can say about 10,000 words. And that's just sort of 2%. Could you imagine a being 2% beyond us? Okay. Could you imagine a being 2% beyond us? And that's sort of, that gives you hope in a way. In the sense that you think, in the way the world is at the moment, you kind of think, well, there is some hope. If we can just evolve a little bit more, and then maybe, we'll see life. But that's a different story. But the point being is we transmit these complicated thoughts to each other. And that's the beauty in that sense. We've got this sort of miraculous, magical ability to communicate. So I don't need to grunt and groan and so on and so forth. But we still do anyway. So language, reflecting on language very briefly, there's 7,000 languages across the world, roughly, and counting. Okay. How many can you speak? Who can speak more than one language? Wow. Who can speak 3? 4?
No.
Wow. You do know language is quite useful to do that. And I've often said years ago, it's not my innovation, it's through what I've learned from other people, that you can sort of frame a problem in a different language and it softens it up. So even by talking about a problem in a different language, it changes the whole context. And also the cortical pathways in the brain as well. It's quite fascinating in that sense. So, if you've got a second language, perhaps if you have a problem, you can sort of talk about it in that second language, and that can be quite useful in reducing the intensity emotionally. And because what's happening really, if you learn a new language, even better still. So what I do with my clients sometimes, to sort of let you into a secret, I get them to go away and talk about an issue, but frame it in a language that they don't know. Why do you think we do that? What's the rationale behind doing that? Because neocortex, logical pathways. So if I can't speak French, for example, and I have an issue, if I've got to go away and research how to talk about the problem in French, I've got to go to the neocortex to learn the language, because I don't have any unconscious mechanism there. And by doing that, what I'm doing, I'm logically seeing it. It's getting it out of the limbic system. It can be quite useful to do. It's consuming time-wise, but the chances are the person's been thinking about the issue for so long anyway. What's an extra hour or two to go away? It really diffuses it, and it helps a lot. But of those 7,000 languages, what's different? Different structure, different vocabulary, different sounds as well. So, it's quite interesting, really, of all those languages across the world. It's fascinating. But more to the point, what I find fascinating, it's an aerial vibration. So the aerial vibration, pierces your eardrum as you watch the person's mouth. Through your eardrums into your brain. So the person says what they say, and just eardrums pick it up, those vibrations up, straight through the eardrum and straight into the brain. Pretty interesting stuff. And what happens then? The words the person receives, the sounds, they transform into thoughts, feelings, and actions through space and time. And you could say a word, an idea, and the person can have an association, and that can turn into behavior. So, as I've said before, the idea might be that smoking is cool. So the teenager sees their cool uncle smoke and talk about how cool smoking is, and they have an idea and they associate smoking with cool. And then you have a behavior. Does that sort of make sense? So you can see how words can be pretty powerful. And experiences can be very powerful in the sense that, okay, people give you ideas. How do you see yourself? Who gave you those ideas? Where did they come from? So we go back to our perception of oneself, and questions being the answers. So if I ask you a question, if I ask you what you do for a job, what do you do immediately? You just focus on what you do. And whilst you focus on what you do, what else do you do? You block everything else out. The unconscious mind goes on a search. You think consciously what you do, everything else gets blocked out. And that's what we do with self-talk. Now you might ignore it and think, well, whatever. But still put in your subconscious mind, what do you do for a job? You're still going to think about it at some point, unconsciously. So questions are really important component, because questions can be influential in how we focus on. So I can say, why always me? I'm so unlucky. Can you see the sort of theme there? And you can sort of turn the questions around to questions of possibility. And the question of possibility might be, well, how can I do that? What can I do? What if I go beyond my expectations? When I achieve my goal? When I learn these language patterns, what will I see, hear and feel? Smell, taste. So possibility. Words are pretty powerful. It starts with a vision. Okay? So perhaps language is a representation of experience. A word like table, book, chair is a label. It's a label for an object you've stored over time. With enough repetition, what happens? You associate one sound with the other, and you recognize the sound. Now you know what a table is, because you've built enough association. You know what a chair is, but if you went to somewhere in the world that they'd never seen one before, and you mentioned the word, you made a reference to it, what would happen, do you think?
They wouldn't understand.
Precisely. So, equally we went somewhere else. We didn't have that underlying scheme of air, there'd be no association. So we sort of built that association for repetition. Who can remember as far back as when you first learned to speak? Can you remember as far back as that? It's a long way back. Long way back for most people in the room. Yeah. But the point being is that, we go back to the unconscious. We go back to the point where consciously, we unconsciously, at that point, we start to pick things up. And you ever seen the baby mimic? Tries to copy the baby, watches, and your mouth sort of mimics. But there's a real acceleration. We'll talk about that more tomorrow, between language. At what point do you see a real acceleration in the baby and language? At what point do you see acceleration in vocabulary? That phenomena. They just sort of words, they go from incredible, isn't it? Incredible. And we'll sort of talk about that more tomorrow, because it's really relevant to language. So you've got a generic representation. Can you move the table, chair, book? Well, you got a representation there anyway. You've had enough experience to know what it is. So, okay, let's do another brief exercise to illustrate the point. It's a wonderful day. You've got sensory coding of the experience. And let me just sort of, to illustrate the point, do an example. Let's sort of switch the conscious mind off momentarily. And if you're comfortable doing so, if you close your eyes again, and as you close your eyes again, perhaps you can feel your feet on the floor. If you're back on the chair, and you can hear the birds cheeping outside. just taking a big, deep breath in, or breath that you're comfortable taking. And think about a wonderful day. You think wonderful day, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you taste? What do you smell? And in your own time, in your own pace, if you want to come back to the here and now, you can. If you don't, we'll wake you up at lunchtime, or at 4 o'clock, or we won't wake you up at all. Okay, what was a wonderful day? What does it constitute? Anyone had an experience they could share? What did a wonderful day mean to them? What was your sensory code in that experience? What did you see? Can anyone tell us what they saw? A wonderful day.
The blue sky straight away.
Okay, really interesting. Anyone else see anything different?
Garden
Sorry.
at home. Garden at home.
Okay. The gardener.
The garden.
Oh, sorry. We won't go there. Let's not go. Okay. Yeah. The window cleaner. Wow. I got a shock. I spilled my tea then. I nearly spilled my coffee. Wow. Straight to the amygdala. Anyone else seen anything else? Or anyone hear anything?
The sea.
Okay. The sea. Okay. Anyone sort of heard the sea? Okay, that's interesting. Anyone else hear anything else?
Birds.
Okay, yeah. I mean, well, I utilise those birds. That's feel. Anyone feel anything?
Sense of expansion and.
Okay. Very esoteric. Yeah. Anyone taste anything?
For me, it was salmon. So
Wow.
I
Okay.
imagine,
Wow.
I imagine because it's
Yeah.
like nice cooking healthy food with like peppers and salmon and being in the kitchen in the blue sky
Yeah.
and just.
That's
Yeah.
interesting stuff. Anyone smell anything?
Yeah, I smelled the sea, which is not the best smell for me actually.
Yeah.
But it was alright, sort of thing, because I felt like I was there at the
Okay.
particular beach.
Yeah, and sort of we code our own experiences. So really, in one respect, words are labels, to the point that we have an experience attached to that label, whatever that experience might be. But there is a misconception, by the way, that Erickson was indirect. Erickson, his process was indirect as a vehicle to communicating concepts. When he was communicating concepts, he was in a therapist state orientating towards helping someone change. So he wasn't indirect himself, it was his process that was indirect. That's the reality. Okay, so it wasn't, he knew where he was going with the person he was working with. There was a clear outcome. There's a clear, well-formed outcome that he was working towards, but it was just flexible in the approach, which we'll explore shortly. And this, to be fair, resonated with me in the masterclass with Jeff at the Erickson Institute a few years ago, when he sort of drew attention to that fact. So I'm going to sort of credit people where credit's due and not pretend it's my interpretation of the literature. It's my interpretation of what I was told. But equally in saying that, there is this sort of misconception that, okay, I'll just blot out whatever. Well, there was a process that was flexible, but the concept was orientating towards going from malleable to adaptive, to being in a better place, better state. If you ever get a chance to read a paper, really important paper, useful to read, by the way, Erickson 64, Confusion Technique Hypnosis, American Journal of Hypnosis. Now, it's sort of the premise of the article is even though clients come to therapy seeking change, they are at the same time resistant to change. Now, why would a client be resistant to change? Why would a client who wants to change be resistant? Any reason why one would be resistant to change? Sorry, yeah. Secondary gain. Anything else they might be?
It might be the change might cause pain.
Yeah, it could do. Identity. A number of things. Now, let's think for a moment now. Let's sort of set the scene. Now, I've used this example before. I'll use it again in case you haven't heard me use it before. And if you hadn't heard me use it before, you'll hear me use it in this context. The Christmas Carol, the film. So, does he really want to change? Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge, does he really want to change?
Not at the beginning.
Well, in the depths of somewhere unconsciously, he wants to change. He wants to be around people. He wants to experience the Christmas joys. But what's sort of getting in the way of that? What's the resistance? Well, he's afraid of getting hurt, I think, in my opinion. Now, only Charles Dickens can verify that. He wrote the book, or the story. But my interpretation is he wants to change. But equally, as much as he wants to change, he's got this fear. Because he's found a coping strategy. I'm being psychoanalytical now. And his coping strategy is to do what exactly? To work hard. To make money. To isolate himself. Because if you go back into the journey of Ebenezer, you'll see he gets hurt at one point. There's a pivotal moment, experiential moment, where his ex-partner, where they decide to go their own way. And what does he do when he sees her meet someone else? He buries his head in the sand, just goes into work as a coping strategy, and decides, well, this is my answer. This gives me meaning. This gives me control. Okay? So, now, as much as he wants to change deep down inside, do people try and help him change? Do people say maybe he should change? Is it suggested? They do suggest it. What's he do? He becomes more resistant. He becomes even more resistant. Well, come to my party if you want. Come to my Christmas dinner. Well, whatever, you know. So it becomes even more, the defense mechanism gets even stronger. So to peel away at that, he gets a visit of his business partner. And then he gets a visit of the past and the ghost of future and present, and they really create a hypnotic experience for him, because he goes back in time, he goes into the future, but he addresses those problems in the now. So it startles him into a realization, and by the end of it, you don't know if it's a dream or if it's real, but it doesn't really matter anyway, because we know the amygdala can't process fear, whether it's real or not real, irrespective of whether it's a real threat. The amygdala, it still fires the biological response. Point being, anxiety is not real. Anxiety is the absence of impending threats. It's imagination, interpretation. It's real for the person experiencing it, and it's the same biological process as fear response. So, as I mentioned before earlier, if someone's sort of coming at you, pointing and shouting, fear response switches on. That's a fear response. If there's a snake in the vicinity, it's fear response. But even if there's no snake or anyone coming towards you, and you get anxious for one reason or the other, it's still a biological switch that switches on unconsciously. So from the point of view of the amygdala, it doesn't differentiate in reality and non-reality. So going back to the drawing board here, he goes through those experiences, which may have been real, may have not been real. But it didn't matter in the end, because he changes, doesn't he? So he doesn't didactically change. He doesn't like, okay, can you change? So he goes for an experience. Okay. Now Erikson, and in the paper 1964 again, they talk about things he did to use, mechanisms for change. So he'd use unusual speech patterns. So he would use unusual facial and motor movements. So Erikson would use metaphors, similes, signification, ambiguity, hypnotic language, presuppositional language. He'd do tasks. And one of the aims of the processes that he would do that for is reduce resistance to hypnotic suggestions. As Marcus said before, turn down the critical factor and go into the unconscious mind and increase suggestibility. So the reality is that, just quieten the brain down a bit more, from that sort of beta state into that more calm state, into that alpha theta state, quieten down. We don't want to go too quiet, you switch off. But the point being is that, okay, if you sort of focus on doing something you really enjoy doing, or you focus on an experience that you really enjoy, it happens automatically anyway. So you're more susceptible then. You're far more susceptible. And one way to sort of use an analogy, when you get up in the morning, you're sort of lucid, okay? Or when you go to bed at night, that's the sort of state that we're suggestible. Because if you hear a song you don't like in the morning, it just stays in your head, doesn't it? Now, this is my theory. I could be wrong. I have no scientific evidence to back it up. It's just my own little hypothesis. I believe that the reason why advertising costs the most in the morning, or at least I believe it does, my experience of working in radio tells me that, it's because that's when we're most susceptible. If you do an advert in the morning, it's likely to stay in your head. If you do it in the evening, you've got the critical factor. You're more awake, you're alert, you can reject it. So, you're more likely to go into that sort of receptivity, if that sort of makes sense. So we sort of see that paper, and you'll see that he'd do things to bypass resistance. Now, one thing I learned as well, going back to Jeff, was that the level of indirectness is in proportion to the resistance you get. So what do I mean by that? So I know if someone comes to see me and their auntie, uncle, sister, brother, butcher, baker, cancelling, make all come to see me and they have success, they're going to be less resistant. They buy into me anyway. But that could be resistance too, if it's over-compliance. But equally, if someone comes in and says, I've tried hypnotherapy before, it's a load of baloney, waste of time, they're more resistant and then more indirect. And it's going to be more indirect. So they might tell a story. I know a guy who knows a guy, or I know someone who knows somebody. So I wasn't referring to you. Does that sort of make sense? So Erickson, what he would do is use the confusion technique, okay, to peel away resistance. He'd do things like negation and opposites, which we'll go into more detail as the day unfolds. It's counterintuitive, isn't it, really? Because you used to tell people telling you just, people being really, all through your schooling life, you've been very methodical and logical to the point that, you try and solve problems methodically, okay? What you do is you decide what I'm going to do to get rid of my negative thoughts. I'm going to write on a piece of paper. I'm going to label them. I'm magnifying. I'm doing this. I'm doing whatever. And I'm going to restructure them by writing them down. And I'm not sort of dismissing that. It's useful to understand your distortions and to didactically see if you can restructure them. But the point I'm trying to make here, as useful as it is, we know one thing's for sure. Who likes ice cream? Who eats more than they should sometimes? So your distortion, I know I shouldn't eat as much as that, but the unconscious mind, the limbic part of the brain, we know smoking's bad for us, don't we? And people who want to give up struggle to give up. Okay? We know chocolate's good for us. But the point being is, okay, you shouldn't love that person, but you still do, for whatever reason. The person keeps going back. Does that make sense? And they know logically, but we don't run logically, do we? So at some point, maybe we want to get the balance right. Now, I'm not dismissing didactic. I'm a big fan of it. But what I'm saying is that why can't we go after the unconscious mind too, where a lot of the problems are lodged, really? If we could make the counter argument that if the problems were in the frontal part of the brain, you get a manual, a size fits all, And if you go to the stores these days, over here, probably a little bit more in America, there's self-help books everywhere. Everywhere you go, there's a damn self-help book. Seriously. And there's a self-help book for self-help books, by the way. And it's ironic, if you go into the any store, you could just literally ask them. So you go in there, where's the self-help section? Well, help yourself. That's a good place to start. But the point being is that all the walls from it would have been solved, wouldn't they? Because logically we know what the answers are, but obviously things don't work that way. So they have use, and they have some half-truths, but the point being is that problems are pretty individualized, one would think. So what Erickson would do is create uncertainty in the client. And for me, it's a bit like a fine line, like we did earlier this morning. I can sort of toe the line and sort of navigate. So just enough for you to understand it to a point, but I can shoot off in any direction. Like Marcus volunteered, and I used suggestions. I said, okay, after the spring rain, or the summer sunshine, or the freshly cut grass, and then I saw he responded to something, and I ran with that. That was my line. He got a response. Then I led, pace and lead. And when we're creating this sort of experience for him, whenever we see resistance, we just go back to pacing again. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense now, it's going to make sense tomorrow, no, I guarantee.
You know the
Yeah.
and react.
Mm.
What did he smile?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, his eyelids were one thing that fluctuating quickly. His body language. When I said the spring rain, he kind of shuffled. When I mentioned the sun of sunshine, he kind of readjusted himself. When I mentioned the grass being cut and the smell, so him breathe and just physiologically, the facial muscles, shoulders dropped again, and that could have been wrong. And if it wasn't right, and you can never really be wrong in the world of utilisation, then we do something else. Because what I do when I'm driving the car, by the way, if I don't like a song, I don't put it up full blast. I change the damn thing. If I'm at home, and these days the remote control's got 1,000 channels. If I don't like what I'm watching, I just change it. And let's change it, as you do. If I like the tune, I change it. So the beauty is you can really never be wrong in this respect, because obviously if the person doesn't make use of what you're saying, then change it. But they make the meaning. One thing that Ericsson would do in his inductions was the early learning set. So the alphabet. So he'd go to early learning. And what he would do, then he'd sort of start changing the words around a little bit in the alphabet, and that would create enough confusion. So when you first learned the alphabet, B and C, and then when he starts mentioning N before M and R before P, and it starts creating a bit of confusion, just a distraction. Because you could be really absorbed about your problem. You can really consumed, really consumed, and you're so consumed about the issue. You're so focused on it. It's almost like a trance. Who's ever been in a situation where you've been road rage and you just can't get over it, man? Yeah, for whatever reason, or something's happened, you're just stewing on it. Someone says something to you, and you just, for whatever reason, you're sort of stuck in that, and all of a sudden you get distracted. And as you get distracted, you kind of forget about it. It's a little bit like, say, for example, I could be so focused on trying to get the cable to work that isn't working for the computer, and they're so focused on it to the point that I think, well, actually I might need to hook up a different projector here. Marcus's ingenuity says there could be one at the back of the TV. So he kind of distracted me at that point, and I found a resource. So the point being is that we're so consumed and not working. At that point I was thinking all sorts. I'm going to get that cable I bought and throw it at the person who goes, what I can't do it was put on Amazon, so I can't even do that. And so I'm thinking, should I leave a review and say, how dare they sell me a cable that damn work? And I was thinking all sorts, that cable. And I ram it down the person, as you do, and I got distracted. Thanks for distracting me, by the way. And I found the resource will say. But the point being, you could be on a conversation with somebody and someone else could sort of phone you. You go back to the conversation, I can't remember what I was saying. So distraction is quite useful for that, in that respect. Okay. So you can use language to change your reality or someone else's reality. You can use language. It's possible. One thing we can do is disconnect. We'll go into more detail, by the way, this afternoon, tomorrow. But disconnecting from a problem. You're so consumed by it. You're so focused on what happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You're so adamant, emotionally connected to that. So the example I used was when I did when I worked with Margaret, who had the swimming phobia on the BBC Radio Manchester. I wasn't working for her for that, I was working for something else, but that was one of the things she wanted to do, go back swimming. After 56 years, she still wouldn't go back to the swimming pool. She had an experience at 8 years of age. So every time she fought the swimming pool, she was connecting to the anxiety of an experience that happened as an 8-year-old. So you've got to somehow disconnect from that experience that you consume with, that association. So, you disconnect from that experience and you connect to a more resourceful experience. So it's like that's piggybacking on you. So we disconnect from that experience, what we connect to. So if I get you to connect to a resourceful state, so when I mentioned about the young man I was working with to build aeroplanes, to connect to the resourceful states. I mean, Is anyone good at doing anything? What are you good at? Anyone got things that they're sort of good at doing, that they're really resourceful at doing? Anyone got things that they can sort of... And if you think about doing what you're good at doing, immediately how do you feel? Exactly. It's a good base to learn. It's a good base to work with. So in terms of language patterns, if you learn, we mentioned earlier that we start to become fluent in language at between two, there's this sort of flurry of words after about 2 years of age and beyond. If you learn those words at 2 and beyond, then what's stopping you learning now? Hypnotic language. Okay, you might be more malleable then, equally more malleable, but all things said, knowing our neuroplasticity. So at this point, the benefit you've got of all the languages we've got in the world, the 7,000, good job that the most influential speaker in hypnosis that we've ever known, Erickson, spoke English. So in a way, it's a good job that Americans can't speak English because we can speak it. So we've got a head start on everybody else in that respect, to the point that if you can learn to speak the way you learn now, and some of you speak more than one language, so you know, you can sort of see a theme. If you learn to speak at 2 years of age, your first words, and how many patterns can you learn today, tomorrow and beyond? Okay, it's not a race. So dissociation, disconnection. So we dissociate, a bit like Gestalt, you know, foreground, background. You can dissociate from a problem, disconnect ourselves by absorbing ourselves. It's something we really enjoy doing. So at a point of all my concerns, all the things that have happened in the past that were coming back into my conscious awareness, and I started to focusing on them, and as you begin to focus on them, you start to realize that that's gone. It's not reliving the moment, it's reliving the experience, because you can't relive a moment. It's not possible to relive a moment because the moment's gone. So you're reliving the experience. So the idea is at that point is that you start to think of the future. You start to imagine all sorts of things in the future. You start to anticipate all sorts of, you know, the land of what if, and what if, and what if, and what if. And you start turning those what if into more positive what if. Well, what if I manage to get over my problems in the past and I can get over them in the future? And what if the only moment I truly have is now? And what's stopping me enjoying the now? Okay. And if I learn one thing, why can't I learn something else? Because you know, time in the way we know it isn't the way it is. Because who's ever been at a bus stop? Anyone ever caught a bus before? Or a train before? Yeah, okay. Or any sort of public transport, and you could be waiting for a plane, and as you wait for the plane gets delayed and you're really frustrated. But equally in saying that, you might think, well, actually, I'd read a book. Or you can be waiting for a bus, and you know when you're waiting for a bus and it's the middle of winter and you get to the bus station a minute before the bus arrives, and that minute feels like a long time, doesn't it? Long time. That minute drags on and on and on. And then it's summertime and it's a beautiful day like today, and you're at the bus stop and you're there and you're almost wishing the bus would come later because you're speaking to someone that you're attracted to and think, goodness me, bus, as you do. Time's a different concept, isn't it? Or someone interesting. I shouldn't have said that because I get into trouble. So you find someone quite interesting and entertaining, you think, well, actually, you know what, I could wait a bit longer. You ever had that before? Don't nod if you... you know. But the point being, it's like a game, isn't it? You watch a game of sport sometimes, it's like, it's gone so fast. There was a game of football on Saturday night. I won't say who was playing. It felt like 3 hours, man. I thought, if this goes to extra time, I'm going to turn off. I can't take any more. You can tell I'm not a fan of either of those two teams. But the point being, sometimes the game feels like a minute, isn't it? You know? It feels like a minute. And that sort of time's a distorted concept. So the reality is, in the hypnotic experience, what you could do, what Erickson did really well, he would link everyday experiences with hypnotic experience. So he would link an experience like watching a sunset, like going for a walk in the park, like cutting someone's hair, something that you're really absorbed in and doing in the moment, Okay, and as you're in that moment, he'd link that with he'd link every experience, hypnotic experience, and sort of pacingly towards a solution in that respect. So you can remember a sunset or a Thailand vacation or a really nice gathering with family before it went horribly wrong and everyone started telling each other off. But the point being, you sort of create that sort of linkage. And we're going to start thinking experience. So it might be really useful to ask the person, what are some experiences you really enjoy? Okay, what are some experiences that you really enjoy? What are things that you enjoy doing? What do you like to do? Okay, I always ask my clients, what do you like to do? What do you enjoy doing? And what happens, do you think? The eyes kind of light up to a point. What are you good at doing? You can use that as resources too. What do you like doing? What do you enjoy doing? It can be quite useful to do and to ask them what they enjoy doing. You can utilize that because, you know, sometimes, you know, until I mention it, you don't realise your foot's on the floor, your back's against the chair, your pen in the hand. What am I doing by making reference to that suggestion? Precisely, you know. Before you told me how great I was, I didn't realise it. But as you told me now, so the point being, you put into conscious awareness. You sort of sprinkle that seed. Okay. Before I asked you about the question of possibility, you were focusing on the problem. You started to focus on the solution, the outcome. I asked you an outcome question earlier. You probably don't remember what the outcome question was because you were in trance, but there was an outcome question, possibility question, which is quite useful. And you become consciously aware. And when you become consciously aware, what do? You look to see, to find. Okay? The unconscious mind goes on a search and scans to search. So it's pretty powerful stuff. Consciously aware. And the point being, you want to stimulate realization. Okay. Who's ever had that before where you have a big realization for an experience? And it might be, you know, you really like somebody and then they did something and you thought, well, actually, I'm not too keen on this. Maybe you got on really well at work and then when they dropped the guard down and you went to a party, or it could have been a Christmas gathering and a Christmas do, and you thought, well, actually, they've gone a bit deeper into their beliefs and values and thought, actually, I don't really like this person very much anymore because they didn't really go down there. Or equally insane that you might not like someone a lot and realise, well, actually, you know what, they're not too different to me, actually. You know, you have an experience, a realisation. You didn't have that before for an experience. So Scrooge had a realisation, a moment that changed his whole identity, a reference experience that was created to him. Okay, and he was trying to figure out, was it real or not real when he got up in the morning? But did it really matter? He was having fun, he was happy. That's the key. Because I just think a comedian, who's ever gone to see a really good comedian? And does the comedian sit there and tell you instructions on how to laugh? No instructions, is there? There's not a science, it's more of an art. You wait for the punchline. But equally insane, at what state are you in when you go see the comedian? Because you probably,
It's expectation.
Precisely. Because if you said what he said, when he didn't say it, in different circumstances, you probably see him differently. You know, does that sort of make sense? So in that context, in that orientation, in the state that you're in what you're expecting, it's okay. So if you heard someone saying what he said in certain circumstances, it probably wouldn't resonate. But then you might laugh at something and someone else doesn't laugh at something. Has that ever happened before? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it happens to me a lot actually. I'm quite a dark human being. Yeah, quite a dry humour. I'm the sort of person in the room that's sort of laughing and everyone else is quiet. And I'm the sort of person who's quiet and everybody else is laughing in the room. So I kind of bounce off two opposites there, as you do. So the comedian doesn't say, time to laugh now. You know, maybe if you're on one of them sort of shows in years gone by where they had the stage, you're told to laugh and clap, as you do. We talked about that before. So an experience we're going to look at, and think about what we talked about earlier, some experiences in your own life where you felt calm, where you felt a sense of it's all going to work out. I'm in a good place. Shakespeare. To quote Shakespeare, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking so makes. What did Shakespeare mean, do you think, by saying that? There's nothing good or bad.
It's the mind's judgment about it.
Yeah, the way you perceive it, our perception. But he didn't get there first. Hamlet got there before him. Sorry, not Hamlet, sorry, Epictetus got there before him. Those philosophers, those Greek philosopher, yeah, that's the thing, really. I think I should have been one of those. That would have suited my lifestyle. What a life that would have been, man. Just wake up whenever you want. Get someone to bring you some grapes and just think all day. That's me to a T. But the point being, there is a case in there, isn't there, really, where we give the meaning. So sometimes meaning is quite useful in that context. So, and that's sort of cognitive therapy, really. It's quite useful. So two people can see the same situation and feel different about it. Completely different. So the way you frame a situation could be completely different. Two people, same experience, feel different. Two people can break up, two people can lose a job, two people can, have a rejection, two people can whatever, and they can all respond differently and get different meaning. That's not putting light on certain situations, just saying it like it is. Okay, now, before we break, and sort of get really, really practical and sort of really go after this sort of stuff, I know what you're thinking at this point. The mind reads you all. The quickest way from A to B is a straight line. And you're right. Completely agree. Okay, completely agree. And I always make this point when I'm working with people who are very didactic in their therapy, that the quickest way from A to B is a straight line. But the point I make is they could have solved their issue already. Why would they come and see you for? So what's the point in seeing you? For the fun of it? Maybe you guys, certainly not me. No one's going to pay to come and see me for the fun of it. That'd be quite brutal. But the point being is that if they could have solved their issue, they would have solved it already anyway. So the point being, they come to you to help solve it. Okay? The Sufis say, sometimes we need to speak to the window so the door can hear. Okay? Simply telling something to do or stop doing it. So stop smoking, stop doing this. They would have solved it anyway. Okay? The people who are parents in the group who've got teenagers or tweenagers, you'll know by telling your teenagers that's not a good idea to do that. It's very rare I'll say, "Oh, gee, Dad or Mum, what a great, thank you for telling me the error of my ways." They're not going to say that, are they? You get that sort of Kevin and Perry nonsense. Yeah, the adolescent brain. But the point being, it's for experiences. So I said earlier about these smoking. The cool uncle smokes and they smoke too, but then you decide, I'm going to take an emphysema ward. You couldn't do that now, by the way, and I don't suggest you go doing that. But the point being, they see the effects of smoking in lung cancer. And they get startled and think, well, actually, not so cool after all. Okay, does that sort of make sense? The experience changes. So whilst it is A to B, non-resistant, great. Stop smoking, be nice to people. Don't fight. Be kind. Don't eat chocolate cake after 10 o'clock. Okay, stay away from that ice cream. So the point being, yeah, it's pretty easy logically, isn't it? Okay? But we don't sort of work logically. And we're going to sort of cover some things that, the patterns like balancing of two opposites that Erickson would do to create confusion. To give you an illustration of a couple of them, and you don't need to be like Jeff would say. I'm going to credit Jeff now because I don't want to credit myself with work that I've picked up other people. And he would sort of say, based on his interpretation of Erickson, would be you moderate the confusion. So if I decide to go and order something from the shop at lunchtime, I'll moderate the confusion to the point that I'm not going to sort of tangle the person up in that respect. So I can be more. So the person going to see you kind of modulate and moderate the confusion. So a couple of examples are, and I can sort of do this with your eyes closed if you want to. It might be easier to sort of close your eyes if you want to close your eyes. There's a couple of confusion. So aware and unaware. And as you close your eyes and you become aware of your breathing, you notice your heartbeat, and aware and unaware. In and out of hypnosis. You can be aware you're not in hypnosis and unaware when you go into hypnosis. You don't need to be aware that you were not in hypnosis when you were aware, and now you're aware you're in hypnosis. You can be unaware. That hypnosis is something that when you are aware, later can be an opportunity for really learn and make good use of it. You have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. And your conscious mind has ways of understanding, and the kind of conscious understandings that you unconsciously understand are different from the unconscious understandings that you consciously understand. But then there are misunderstandings that you consciously understand, your conscious misunderstandings, or you consciously misunderstand your conscious understandings, but you really can't understand until you take a deep breath in, with your eyes closed, and allow things to subside. Okay, and in your own time, in your own pace, you come back here and now. Now you wouldn't be obviously as brutal as that. That illustrates confusion. So why would you do that? Because the brain likes familiarity. They're going to latch on to the first thing they can sort of latch on to. And you're going to sort of distract them from what we said earlier. They're adamant of what the issue is. They're adamant, they're in that rage. You've driven here this morning, you've got road rage. You start taking it out on me for some reason, I become the strong man. And I find a way to distract you. In whichever way I can find to distract you. And by doing that, you sort of kind of forget at that point. So it can be quite useful to distract people. Confusion can distract people to that point. Other ways we can explore, and these aren't exhaustive, I'm sort of mindful of lunch now. Ambiguity, offer additional options. Ambiguity can soften rigidities, so we can be ambiguous. It's quite useful. And there are different ways we can be ambiguous. We'll go into more detail after the break, as you do. If we think neuro, we have a range of automatic and unconscious processes that govern our subjective experience of the world and how we act in our world. We can be permissive. So if I ask you, perhaps you can close your eyes, sort of reinforcing the learning we've done so far this morning and linking it to after lunchtime. If I say close your eyes, how do you feel? If I say perhaps, so a directive, soft invitation, pause. So perhaps you could close your eyes. Okay, and you can obviously apply that to many other things. To soften that sort of rigidity, it's more permissive. Okay. Okay. A presuppositional link. Since something undeniable is happening, link it to a deniable. So for example, you're sitting in the chair, you can close your eyes. So what's undeniable at that point?
Sitting on the chair.
Precisely. What could you deny? Close your eyes. Because you've come to see me, you're looking to improve. What's undeniable there if the person's come to see you? So the undeniable, the pre-sup link, and I think the key thing here is the proportion of one with the other. The proportion of what's undeniable to what they can deny, but they probably won't deny because for their benefit, in the sense that if I say you feel your feet on the floor, notice you're breathing, okay, it's undeniable as long as you are breathing, your feet on the floor, and then I can say, okay, think of a time where you felt calm. Now, you could probably deny that, there may not have been a time, but equally there's a good chance there will be. But then as I start to pace the experience, then you're more or less likely to resist. So an example might be, let's say Marcus says, I'm going to the shop at lunchtime. He says he's going there. Just to give you an example. If I said to Marcus, okay, he says, I'm going to the shop at lunchtime. While you're there, Marcus, if I give you some money, could you get me an orange juice? Now, what's undeniable? If he says he's gone to the shop, what could he deny? Precisely. He could deny that, but he probably won't because he's a nice guy, and there's a very good chance to say yes. If I said, Marcus, while you're in town, can you go take £50,000 from the bank for me and bring it back? Okay, it's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? Don't do that, by the way. Nobody do that because it's on camera. I'll get blamed now, won't I? I get into trouble. We've got our next police officer doing it, as you do. But can you see the point? The stretch is key, isn't it? So when you see this sort of stage hypnotist, a lot of priming goes on. and so on and so forth. But the point being, the sort of stress. So if you've got someone who's come to see you, the undeniable might be you feel your feet on the floor, back on the chair, or you're veering, and you become more calmer. Now they can deny being calmer, but why would they? They come to see you anyway, unless obviously they're resistant. Misspeaking is quite useful too to correct confusion. Misspeaking there. Did he say that? Did she say that? So it can be quite distracting in one sense. Okay. Illogisms are quite useful as well. So what they're expecting to hear, verbing. Example of a neologism is, say, a newly coined phrase. Shakespeare being the master of it. So, for example, what does chillax really mean?
Chill and relax.
Precisely. A combination. It's a hybrid. So, a newly coined phrase. You can maybe commonly use everyday life, but we haven't accepted it as mainstream language. That'd be quite useful too, and that would trigger error-related negativity. So, for example, you might say to someone, "What are some things that I'm out of tune now?" As you do. So, what are some of the things that we've got? What are some of the neologisms? Someone told me the other day they were sexting, whatever that means. And nearly fell out of my seat. What the hell is that? Wow. Well, let's not go there. But the point being is that, these sort of phrases, and they can sort of, and why would you do it? To bypass level of resistance. So I deliberately did that. It was getting close to lunch, and you're probably all hungry and want to get away from here for an hour or so. So to bypass that resistance. And the more resistance, the more I'm going to go around the houses, if that sort of makes sense. So after lunchtime, we're going to get practical. Going to work on these things. We're going to some really, really fantastic exercise we're going to do after lunchtime. I really, really enjoy the exercise after lunchtime. It's going to be really fantastic. We're going to practical and play around and just sort of embed the learning. By the close of play today, you're going to make huge inroads into these language patterns. Huge inroads. And you're going to select the ones that really work for you. And as you select the ones that work for you, you're going to sort of see it. Because sometimes you don't know what you're going to say until you say it. Because some of you guys are joining Toastmasters too now. Yeah. And sometimes you sort of stand up, you don't know what you're going to say, and you stay until you say it. And when you say what you're going to say, it just comes out. So is till 1:30 okay for lunch? Yeah. Everyone can sort of eat and can have a Mediterranean lunchtime. We can practice outside as well. You're in the med. There we go. Okay, so we're back at 1:30 and we'll go again. Thank you.